Well, I'm going to talk about the Ice Age, which is a subject I've been studying for 45 years. So as a result, I've gone into various aspects of it. But notice that subtitle, Only the Bible Can Explain It. That's a pretty provocative title, but just stay with me and I will flesh it out. What is an ice age? An ice age is a great increase in snow and ice. We have 10% of the continents covered by ice now. During the Ice Age, 30% were covered, mainly in the middle and high latitudes and in the high tropical mountains where the snow level was lowered about 1,000 meters. Also, it was the last major event in Earth history. And I'm going to come back and revisit this point, the last major event in Earth history, both by creation scientists and secular scientists. So there's actually, in secular Earth history, there's actually 5 Ice Age periods, long periods of many millions of years. The latest one's called the Pleistocene, or the Quaternary, less than 2.6 million years ago. Then you go back to 280 million years ago, you have the late Paleozoic, and then before that, the late Ordovician, then the late Precambrian, which includes about 3 or 4 ice ages, which 2 or 3 of them are global ice ages, completely covers the globe, supposedly. Then you had the mid-Precambrian one around 2,000 million years ago. Those are the 5 ice age periods. Now, the Pleistocene ice age, their last one, I believe is real, but only the last is of their 50 or more ice ages they claim now is the real post-flood ice age. The other 4 are not ice ages at all, but they do show some ice age features, which is rather interesting, but I believe they can be explained by gigantic submarine landslides during the flood. And if you want to know more about that, you can get this book, Ancient Ice Ages or Gigantic Submarine Landslides, which you can get from the local creation group there in British Columbia. Anyway, here's the challenge of the Ice Age. We're challenged to explain it. They say each Ice Age during what's called their Pleistocene period or Quaternary takes 100,000 years to build and disappear. A glacial phase is 90,000 years, interglacial phase 10,000. And there's been 50 regular repeating ice ages during the past 2.6 million years. If you notice that that doesn't quite add up, it's because ice ages older than 1 million years oscillated every 40,000 years. And those in the last 1 million years, every 100,000 years. These just happen to be the cycles that they claim for the astronomical theory of the Ice Age, which has a periods of 23,000, 40,000, 100,000 years. So there are, I believe they're assuming, and there've been a lot of circular reasoning going in this, to date each of these, their so-called ice ages to these Milankovitch or periods or the astronomical theory. That's their current theory that they believe now, even though there's over 60 theories out. That's the astronomical theory is the one that dominates right now. And here's a quote from Arthur Strahler, anti-creationist geologist. He says, increasing the duration of the ice age by a factor of about 10 greatly increases the stress upon the creation scientists, who must compress the events of 15 million years into 4,000 years of post-flood time. We got it right, it's post-flood time. And what's this increasing the duration of the ice age by 10 times? Well, they did some research, mainly on deep sea cores, and discovered, quote unquote, that the Antarctic ice sheet was 10 times older than they thought. They sometimes do things like that, increase the ages dramatically or decrease them, but usually they increase them. So now the Antarctic ice sheet supposedly started building about 35 million years ago slowly and reached equilibrium 15 million years ago and has been in steady state ever since. And that supposedly increases the stress upon us. Well, what do we do when we get quotes like this or challenges? Well, I go back to the Bible. Examine everything carefully. We got to do it carefully, not just superficially, because we might know enough, just enough to brainwash ourselves, get ourselves in trouble. We need to hold fast to that which is good. Hold fast to the Bible as God's word. There's lots of evidence for the Bible being accurate in archaeology, fulfilled prophecy, and other things. So we have a lot of evidence. Christianity is an evidence-based religion. We hold fast to the Bible, and I'm holding fast to Jesus, my Lord and Savior. And from there, I've been examining these things carefully for the last 45 years. So with that, let's take a look at the Ice Age. I'm going to ask a series of questions. The first question is, was there really an Ice Age? And did I develop a model to explain something that never existed? Well, how do we determine whether an Ice Age occurred where we don't see ice today? Well, you go to places that are glaciated today. For instance, the beautiful Athabasca Glacier in your Canadian Rockies. It's been melting back since 1890. And so you see what's been left. You see mounds of debris, hummocky of rocks of all sizes mixed together. And in the front of this glacier, right there you see a ridge. It's called an end moraine or terminal moraine, where the glacier moved out and piled up rocks in front of it and then melted back, forming a ridge of debris of rocks of all sizes mixed together. And along the edges, you have a lateral moraine like this. And by the way, I must say something about global warming. The maximum extent of glaciers worldwide were close to about 1890. They'd been advancing for 500 years due to the Little Ice Age. And now they've been melting back a little bit due to global warming. I believe global warming from the data is real. It's claimed to be 1 degree centigrade since about 1880. But you can show that natural processes are at least half of this global warming, like the Little Ice Age I just told you about. Before that, the medieval warm period, about from 800 to 1200 AD, where the Vikings settled in Greenland. So if you take away natural processes, man adding carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere probably has warmed up the atmosphere only 0.5 degrees centigrade. That's all since 1880. Very small. We have time to do research and learn more about it. Anyway, I'm going to get off of that dog leg and get back to the Ice Age. Anyway, you can see some of the features left behind by a glacier. And when you climb up on the ice, which I don't recommend, I was young and stupid in these days. And you look at the lateral moraine, how sharp it is, where you see some of the boulders sticking out of it, and it's rocks of all sizes, typical of glacial moraine. And then when you go into the areas where it is backed off, you find boulders that have striations or scratches in different directions. So you have a boulder on the bottom of a glacier moves, scratches the bedrock in the direction of movement. And since it's in ice, it can shift, and then you get scratches in different directions. So you can see at least two directions, this one right here and one right there. And here's a scratched bedrock from the Athabasca Glacier. These are features typical of glaciation today. So we'll take a look around in the Northern Hemisphere, places that are believed to have been glaciated during the Ice Age. And here's one spot here west of Great Falls, Montana, where I lived for 27 years. This is the Rocky Mountain front you see in the background. And about 15 miles out from it, you see this mound of debris right here. And it continues over here. It was continuous in here, but it probably dammed up a lake that burst through and eroded it there. And that's where they put the reservoir in this case. So it looks like a subdued terminal moraine, not so sharp, more rounded, maybe about 100 feet tall. And when you look at the material in the moraine, it's rocks of all sizes in a finer grain matrix, typical of a glacial moraine you find in glaciated areas today. And you find scratched boulders in different directions. Here's one direction there, and there's another one there, and you might even find a third, but at this point, I don't see one. But anyway, it's typical of glaciated areas. And then when you go up in the Rocky Mountain front, the first cliff, you find the scratched bedrocks that go from west to east out into the high plains over an 800-foot cliff right in here. And notice that these scratched bedrock are still there. They have not eroded away by weathering. And they get a lot of precipitation here. So it indicates the Ice Age was not that long ago. And this is an area in the Northern Rockies and the high plains that gets up in the 80s for high temperatures in the summer. And that is a very contrary to forming an ice cap in this area. So you have to drastically change the climate in this area. And then go in Northeast Oregon, up in the beautiful Wallowa Mountains, looking north, you find this horseshoe-shaped ridge pattern right in here. And it trapped this Wallowa Lake in it. Well, this is a signature of a lateral in moraine and lateral moraine from an ice that came out of the valley and moved out onto the plain near Enterprise, Oregon, about 4,000 feet above sea level. And Enterprise gets up in the low 90s for average high temperatures in the summer. So it's very difficult to form ice in the Wallowa Mountains that would come out onto the plains. So, and when you look at the lateral moraine from down below, you can see how sharp it is, meaning the Ice Age was not that long ago. And you can see the trees for scale. That lateral moraine is 600 feet tall, 600 feet. And when you look at the material in the moraine, it's rocks of all sizes in a finer grain matrix. A finer grain matrix is maybe sand or small rocks around these bigger rocks. It's typical of a glacial moraine. So this area was glaciated. And you find these erratic boulders in a lot of places. Erratic boulder is a boulder that does not outcrop in the local area. It's been transported from afar. These are the beautiful Okotoks erratics, if you can call them that, southwest of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Look at the size of that, and it's very sharp. That wouldn't have been transported by the Genesis flood runoff. That has to be transported by an iceberg. And there's a train of them from Jasper, Alberta, down to Cutbank, Montana. A train of them called the Foothills Erratic Train, I believe. And you find these things, not this big. This is the biggest one I've ever seen. But you find all kinds of smaller ones, 2, 3 feet in diameter, all through the areas glaciated. And here's an interesting erratic boulder. It's an erratic boulder. It's a shale that's been heated up and metamorphosed slightly and become harder. It's called an argillite. And it probably weighs about 100 tons. And it's southwest of Portland, Oregon, in the Willamette Valley, about 200 miles south of where the ice boundary of the ice sheet at Olympia, Washington. And you might ask, well, how did it get there? Especially when you realize that no argillite actually outcrops in the whole state of Oregon. Well, the only way it could have got there is on an iceberg. And indeed, it did from what's called the Lake Missoula flood. During the melting of the ice was in the northern United States, as well as most of practically all British Columbia. And fingers of it came down valleys, and it dammed up water in the Clark Fork River and formed glacial Lake Missoula here, 500 cubic miles of water, 2,000 feet deep where the ice occurred. And the mountains around Sandpoint, Idaho were not glaciated, so we know it's about 2,500 feet thick. But ice damming it up, you know it can't last too long, so it broke through in a matter of days, carved up eastern Washington, eroded 50 cubic miles of soft silt on the top and basalt rock below, forming this green pattern you see there. And during that flood, it picked up all kinds of boulders and in the ice. There's boulders a lot of times in the ice, and it spread those erratic boulders all through eastern Washington, the Columbia Gorge, and into the Portland, Vancouver, Washington area. It was 600 feet deep going over Spokane, Washington, 1,000 feet in the Columbia Gorge. And when it spread out in the Portland, Vancouver area, it was 400 feet deep. I mean, this was a massive flood that the secular science rejected for 40 years because it was too biblical in scale, until they found out there are thousands of pieces of evidence to verify it. And they rejected it because it was just too big in scale. I think this is what they're doing to the Genesis flood. But regardless, in order to have a Lake Missoula flood, you have to have an ice age. So the ice age was real. And by the way, this is the path of the Lake Missoula flood. It's like a braided river, 100 miles wide, 660 kilometers wide, carving through eastern Washington. The upshot of all this, this is where the ice and snow occurred during the Ice Age. Practically all of Canada, except for a little bit in the northwest Yukon territory. Alaska, just the mountains were glaciated, not the lowlands. That's a major mystery of secular scientists. Why weren't the lowlands glaciated? And that's where you find the woolly mammoths, bisons, and horses and other animals in those lowlands. And of course, it covered the northern United States and a lot of the mountainous areas in the western United States. You go to Europe and Asia, this is the general location. I'm saying general because the boundaries of this have changed somewhat over the years. But notice here's Siberia right in here, and only the mountains in Siberia were glaciated, but not the lowlands. Here's the New Siberian Islands up here. I assume everyone can see my cursor. And this is area, the lowlands of Alaska, Siberia, and the Yukon Territory that were not glaciated are where you find millions of woolly mammoths in the permafrost, which I'm going to talk about in the next talk. So that's where it was glaciated during the Ice Age. So there was an Ice Age. Can mainstream secular scientists explain the Ice Age? By the way they talk, you would think that, oh, it's easy. Just get a little cooling, presto, we have our Ice Age. In fact, we not only have one Ice Age, we have maybe 50 of them in 2.6 million years. Well, let's check that out. And by the way, I might add right here, something I forgot to mention at the very beginning. Secular scientists claim that creationist scientists have a model and that we can't explain anything in Earth history that occurred. They claim that. I'm testing them on the Ice Age. So the first thing I have found when I've been challenged, I find out that they have trouble explaining these things also. And a lot of times they bluff their way through it, like in college courses on these subjects. In order to find out how it can be explained, whether they can do it, we need to know the conditions for an Ice Age. There's essentially three conditions for an Ice Age. Cooler summers. Winters are generally cold enough in most areas. In fact, it's better to have warmer winters, which in the model I've developed did occur, because the cooler the air, the less moisture it holds. So you got to cool the summers off so the snow doesn't melt through the summer season. So not only cooler summers, but cooler late springs and cooler early falls. In other words, the warm season has to be cooler. Also, you have to have greater snowfall. So that it doesn't melt during the summer, and it just keeps building up year after year. And the third requirement has to persist for many years. You can't find a climate change to produce cooler temperatures and a snow cover lasting the summer for 1 year. It's got to go for many years. So those are the requirements. So how much summer cooling? Well, a man did a computer study of snow cover in Canada, and he said to himself, where would that 1 inch line be after the summer melting season? Where would it be if I cooled the average temperature of central and eastern Canada off by increments of 2 degrees centigrade? So he did it, 2, 4, 6, kept going down. When he got to 10 degrees centigrade below normal, below the summer normal, This is where his 1 inch line was, right in this blue area right in here. When he cooled it off 2 more degrees centigrade down to minus 12 degrees centigrade or 20 degrees Fahrenheit, his 1 inch line was right here, just in Northeast Canada. But we know the ice went clear down south of the Great Lakes. By the way, it didn't move from Northern Canada to the northern United States. In this model that I've developed, it grows more or less in place because you suddenly have an instant winter and it grows more in place. You don't have to move it at a glacial pace that take tens of thousands of years from Northern Canada to the northern United States. So it grows more or less in place. But what this is telling you is that it takes a whopping a lot of temperature change in the summer to cool it off. But let's check a place like Minneapolis, Minnesota, along the edge of the ice sheet in the United States, and see how much cooling we need there. Well, the average temperature in Minneapolis is 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which includes the maxes and the minimums. And we have to cool the temperature off in summer now to at least 32 degrees Fahrenheit. But because summer sunshine is so powerful, and that's the main mechanism to cause melting of snow and ice, we have to actually cool the temperature off well below freezing. How much farther below freezing? Well, I got a report from the journal Quaternary Research of when does the lowlands of Antarctica start having net melting when they warm up in the spring. What temperature? Well, when they warm up to 14 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when they start getting net melting of the snow along the edge. So that has to be the case generally around Minneapolis. But I'll be a little more conservative. I'll say it only has to cool off to 20 degrees Fahrenheit before the snow will stay for the whole summer. That's a summer temperature drop of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Where are we going to get a climate change in the summer to cool off the temperatures in the northern United States 50 degrees Fahrenheit? So you might have guessed it. The Ice Age is a radical climate change, and it is not a feather in their cap. It is a strong challenge to them. And I'm going to give a bunch of quotes by experts indicating that it is a challenge. J.K. Charlesworth, in his book called The Quaternary Era, 1957, page 1532, is a 1,700-page book on the Ice Age. He says Pleistocene phenomenon, that's Ice Age phenomenon, have produced some good theories. No, an absolute riot of theories ranging from poor to good or very good. What? Oh, ranging from the remotely possible to the mutually contradictory and the palpably inadequate. And this, by the way, includes the astronomical theory of the Ice Age that they believe now. That's actually an old theory that's been around since about 1860. Anyway, that's not saying much, but that's 1957. That was said, but we know so much more now. This is modern science, right? Well, let's get a more recent report. Here's the U.S. News and World Report in 1997 reported on the top 18 mysteries of science. The top 18 took up the whole issue. But some of these mysteries are mysteries of their own making because they believe in evolution. Like that first one there, why should males exist? What's behind that? Well, because they believe in evolution, and in evolution there should be one sex that reproduces asexually. They can't figure out why there's a male and a female. But this is where the biblical worldview has evidence hands down on them, because the Bible simply says he made us male and female. But one of the top 18 mysteries is what causes ice ages? They don't know. That they believe there's many of them. And in 2001, David Alt in Glacial Lake, Missoula, and its humongous floods. Yes, they believe in multiple floods. I think there's only one major flood. Although theories abound, no one really knows what causes ice ages. And in 2008, in the most widely read journal in the world, Nature, these two guys said, perhaps the longest standing puzzle in the earth sciences is what caused the northern hemisphere ice sheets to come and go. They don't know. It's a major challenge, and it's been a major challenge for about 150 years. So they can't explain it. Can we explain it with a biblical worldview? Well, where would we place the Ice Age in biblical Earth history? Before the flood, during the flood, after the flood? Well, it's obvious it wouldn't occur during the flood because the floodwaters were probably very warm because of all the heat added from various processes. And if it was before the flood, it would be destroyed by the flood. So the only place to put it is, and that doesn't occur now. The ice sheets don't occur now except Greenland and Antarctica. So the place to put it is a transitional climate from the flood to the present, which strongly suggests that, hey, maybe the conditions of the flood changed the climate for an ice age afterwards. Indeed, this is the case. Because what does a flood do? How does the flood fulfill the three requirements? The flood was a gigantic volcanic event, among other things. And at the end of the flood, it'd leave all these volcanic dust and especially the aerosols trapped in the stratosphere, causing summer cooling over land. It doesn't affect the winters or over the oceans because of other factors, but it mainly affects the summers over land. So there's your summer cooling. Also, the fountains of the great deep and volcanism cause the warm ocean. It'd be warm from top to bottom and pole to pole. You could probably take a swim in the Arctic Ocean right after the flood. What's the significance of that? Well, the warmer the water, the more the evaporation. You can evaporate 7 times as much water into the atmosphere at a sea surface temperature of 30 degrees centigrade than at 0 degrees centigrade. 7 times. And this effect would be especially strong at mid and high latitudes, where sea surface temperatures today are pretty cool, but during the early ice age especially, they'd be a lot warmer, and you get massive evaporation at high and mid latitudes, be caught into storm and dumped on the adjacent land masses, forming an instant, quick, rapid ice age. And the mechanism is going to persist, but it'll wane with time. How will it wane? Because volcanism will decrease after the flood. We know that there was a lot of ice age volcanism to replenish the aerosols, but also the oceans would cool off. And as they cool off, they quit evaporating so much moisture. And finally, the ice age runs out of gas, essentially. It reaches a maximum, and then it melts. So here's a little schematic. Volcanic dust and aerosols reflect some of the sunlight back to space, cooling the ground and the lower atmosphere. Now, dust will settle out in a matter of weeks to months, but aerosols stay up in the stratosphere anywhere from 2 to 10 years, depending on how high the volcanoes took the aerosols. So there's your cooling mechanism for the summer. And volcanism would continue during the ice age to replenish the dust and aerosols, probably at a diminishing rate with time as the Earth settled down to equilibrium from after the flood. And J.K. Charlesworth says signs of ice age volcanicity and Earth movements are visible in all parts of the world. Lots of ice age volcanism to keep the cooling, summer cooling going. So you have a powerful mechanism for a rapid ice age. And here's a schematic for it at high latitudes: warmer oceans, powerful evaporation, and with volcanic dust in the upper atmosphere reflecting sunlight back to space, cooling the land, and snow and sleet fall on the land and build up to ice sheets. That's kind of a quick schematic of how it works based on the climatic aftermath of the flood. Therefore, so there was an ice age. We can explain it. How rapid was the ice age? Do we need 100,000 years for the ice age? Well, here's my evidence that the ice age was very rapid. Right there. This is it, Jenkins. Indisputable proof that the ice age caught these people completely off guard. He never got out of the outhouse before it dumped on them. More seriously, I used, to time the ice age, I used what's called an energy balance or energy budget equation for the cooling of the ocean. And what I did was I used the heating terms, which are solar radiation, subtracted cooling terms, which are 2/3 evaporation and 1/3 sensible heat cooling. And also there's some radiational cooling, infrared radiational cooling. But I had to estimate the change in temperature, change in time. So I estimated the change in temperature to reach glacial maximum. And I had to assume what the original ocean temperature averaged. Remember, this is an average. There are cool spots, warm spots. 30 degrees centigrade, I believe, was the average ocean temperature after the flood. Today, it's 4 degrees centigrade. The ocean is very cold. Even in the tropics, you get down there far enough and it gets very cold water. But then since at 4 degrees centigrade, we don't have the ice sheets over Canada or Europe and Asia anymore. The ice age must have reached maximum well before 4 degrees centigrade. So I postulated that the ice reached glacial maximum when the ocean temperature cooled to 10 degrees centigrade. That's a drop of 20 degrees centigrade or 38 degrees Fahrenheit. How long would that take? Well, in these equations during in an ice age climate, there's no way to be accurate. So I use maximums and minimums for the variables because I just wanted to bracket the time. That's all, to get a rough estimate. So I use maximum minimums, and this is my range of variables to reach glacial maximum. The best estimate was about 500 years to reach glacial maximum. 500 years. Then we have to determine how much ice was collected on the continents and then melt it. So I had to estimate how much ice based on a lot of factors, and I use maximum minimums there. So I got an average, here's the ranges for the Northern Hemisphere and Antarctica, where most of the ice was in Antarctica. There's a few places like the Andes that had more ice and snow, but it's practically all in Antarctica. The best estimate for the Northern Hemisphere is 2,300 feet. The best estimate for Antarctica is about 4,000 feet. So in 5,000 years, then you melt it. And the way I use the equation, the energy balance over snow and ice cover, which is the most physical way you can estimate it. And this is the same way as estimating the cooling time of the ocean. You add up all the heating terms, subtract the cooling terms, and you get a change in temperature, change in time. But in this case, once the ice warmed up to 32 degrees, any more added heat melts. So that becomes your melt. And using maximum minimums for the variable, especially the reflectivity of snow, was the main variable that I had to estimate. Here's what I got. For the northern United States, which is the periphery, the range is 40 to 100 years. The best estimate was melting in 70 years, or about 10 meters a year it melts. If it had an average thickness at the periphery, which it didn't, it'd be a lot thinner. But interior Canada, interior Scandinavia would be cooler and less sunshine, so it'd take longer. So it'd take about 200 years to melt the interior. So the total time for an ice age is 700 years, just 700 years. This is a case where we meet a challenge. We stick with the Bible, use biblical Earth history, and redo it. And we find out we can have an ice age in 700 years, not 100,000 years. We don't need 100,000 years or 40,000 years for an ice age. But was there more than one ice age? Well, I actually believe there's two ice ages. One was near the Garden of Eden at the very beginning of creation. And here it is, the Earth's first ice age. Eve, why are you acting so cold toward me? Did I do something wrong? You figure it out, Adam. All this is saying is that when man and woman were created, we had perfect communication. But it doesn't work so good anymore. And I know because I've been married 51 and a half years. And in general, I'd say men have clueless problems and women have sensitivity issue. And, you know, as a result, communication doesn't work out so well. Anyway, let's not take it any further than that. This is an article I found in the journal Geology. It's put out by 6 scientists from the University of Alberta in Edmonton. They used to say from Edmonton south into to the United States, there were anywhere from 3 to 5 ice ages. For quite a while, they believed there were 4 all over the world. For 60 years, they believed there were 4. Everywhere they went, they only saw 4 ice ages. Well, as a result, they found out later on this was due to a bias, because they were believed to be 4 out there, and that's what they saw. And in Alberta, it was the same thing. But these scientists looked at it again, and they said there's only 1 ice age. And it was the Laurentide. They're talking about the Laurentide ice sheet that covered central and eastern Canada and the adjacent United States. And it's in the late Wisconsin time. And it's only 1 ice age. Just there's on land over that area, just evidence of 1. Notice what they say. Glacial reconstructions commonly do what? Assume a multiple glaciation hypothesis in all areas that contain a till cover. Till is glaciological jargon for glacial debris. They're assuming multiple glaciations. So they find a little complication here and there. They easily postulate multiple glaciations. And along the edges of the ice sheets, there were complications. And for instance, the edge of an ice sheet will slowly move forward, and then it can move back. Sometimes it can surge fast forward, move back. And in between, when it's moved back, you can have sand and other debris fill in on top of the glacial debris that just melted. And sometimes you can have organisms die in there, and then they're covered up by the next advance of that edge of the ice sheet. So we know the edges of these ice sheets can do these sorts of things, but now we know that this can always occur in 1 ice age. So the evidence on land mostly says there's only 1 ice age. So where do they get these 50 ice ages? They actually get them from the bottom of the ocean in deep sea cores. They drill deep sea cores. They have thousands of these cores, and they send it down through the top sediments. And they analyze variables in those top sediments, and various variables, they wiggle around an average like this down the deep sea core. So they have an average. So when it wiggles this way, they claim there's an ice age. When it wiggles back this way, it's an interglacial, and so forth, so on, all the way down. So that's how they got their 50 ice ages. I believe that those are due to fluctuations, oceanic fluctuations during the ice age, and are not due to ice ages per se. But the main evidence is on land is these 6 scientists from the University of Edmonton and Alberta found us that you just have 1 ice age. Will there be a future ice age? What's behind this? Well, we're still in the glacial, interglacial oscillations, you see. The cycle hasn't stopped. And they say we are, the interglacial lasts about 10,000 years. And the last ice age melted about 10,000 years. So we're due soon for the next ice age. And Daniel Grossman said in the New York Times in 2003, if the past is any indication, the Earth is at the end of another such warm period, poised to descend into a new ice age. See, they expect it. And in fact, we had global cooling from 1945 to 1975. Anybody remember that? We had global cooling for 30 years when carbon dioxide was really shooting up, going against the expectation that we should be warming. And magazines and books came out saying the next ice age is due soon. I have 3 of those. And it changed in 1975 to global warming. But it's kind of interesting to read those things behind after the fact that the next ice age was coming, and it's because they expected it to come soon. And by the way, you believe everything you read in the newspaper, don't you? I don't hardly believe a thing I read in the newspaper. And I've tested it before and found it very inaccurate. Anyway, there never will be another ice age, so you can relax. Vancouver, British Columbia is not going to have an ice sheet over it in the near future. And the promise of the rainbow is not only a promise there will never be another flood, And since the flood caused the ice age, there'll never be another ice age. Simple as that. The Ice Age explains it, several other mysteries, 5 of them also. I'm not going to go into these. These are the bonus features you can read about in some of my articles and books. And anyway, during the Ice Age, you had desert areas that were once wet with big lakes, like the Southwest United States. Lots of lakes called pluvial lakes. And they don't understand how you can fill these places up with lakes. Death Valley had a lake 600 feet deep. Also, the second, woolly mammoths in Siberia, Alaska, and Northwest Canada, which will be the topic of the next talk. And so they find it hard pressed to explain not only what they're doing there, how they died, and all kinds of other mysteries. There's lots of mysteries associated with the woolly mammoth and those other animals. There's about 40 other types of mammals up there at the same time, but the bones we find are mostly woolly mammoth. Then in Ice Age debris, we find a mix of cold and warm weather animals and plants. This is not an exception, it's the rule. Now, secular ice ages are very cold, winter and summer. So we can understand why there's cold adapted animals there, but what about warm? What are they doing there? Well, it's because they have the wrong climate model, essentially, but we can explain it, especially early in the Ice Age. And at the end of their last ice age, only their last ice age, we had a mass extinction of 2/3 of mammals over 100 pounds globally. Global mass extinction at the end of just their last one, which gives you a hint that maybe there was just one ice age. And also, I touched on this already, the unglaciated lowlands of Siberia, as well as Alaska and the Northwest Yukon Territory. They don't understand why those areas are glaciated. But you can learn more about it in my articles and books if you so desire, or look online. I'll give you some websites here pretty soon. Anyway, in summary, the Ice Age was a real event not that long ago. It is a major mystery for evolutionary science. They challenge us, but it's a major mystery for them. Noah's flood caused the transitional climate for an ice age. The Ice Age lasted only 700 years. Don't need 100,000 years for an ice age. Ultimately, there's only one ice age. Thus, only the Bible really explains the Ice Age because of the flood, going back to my original title. And there will be no future ice age. Some more concluding thoughts. Creation scientists have a viable mechanism for the last major event in Earth history. We do have answers to a lot of challenges. There's answers books out there, and there's websites you can check. We have lots of answers, but we still don't have answers in some areas. That's why I do research, and many other creation scientists do research. So we have the viable mechanism for the last major event in Earth history. While evolutionary scientists are far from a solution, then why should we believe them for all their older events? Historical hypotheses like the dinosaurs' extinction, the evolution of the trilobites, thousands of just so stories of events in geology and paleontology. And why should we believe them for any of those events if they can't answer the last major event in Earth history? More concluding thoughts. The Ice Age is an example of what can be done with hundreds of other science challenges to the Bible. Yes, there's still hundreds of them. And the reason we still have those challenges is because we need researchers and earth scientists. If I had lots of time, I could solve probably maybe 20% of them. But I don't have that much time. I can only work on so much. Also, a key point, time is not a side issue, but a young Earth timescale sometimes is the key to solving major mysteries that have lasted over 150 years. It's the key. How so? Well, secular scientists know that volcanoes cool the climate. And we've had a lot of modern examples of this, like Krakatoa and Tambora. Tambora caused the year without a summer in Canada, the northern United States, and Europe. So they know it cools. But when they stretch all these volcanoes they know occurred during the Ice Age up to 10,000 or 100,000 years, each volcano lasts only a very short time. And so the long term amounts to nothing. So to them, it's not a cooling mechanism. But if you telescope all that volcanism to within several hundred years, it becomes a powerful cooling mechanism for the summer. Another more concluding thoughts, the Ice Age is based on the flood. Therefore, the flood, one of the most despised events by the culture, is a real event of the past. We can turn it around and show that we can explain the Ice Age, which explains that there is really a flood. Therefore, it is easy to believe the whole Bible is true, which tells us how to live here on earth and how to go to heaven. Anyway, if you want to read more about all this, there's a lot more details, and focusing in on the woolly mammoths, which is the next talk, in this popular level book, Frozen in Time, the woolly mammoth, the Ice Age, and the biblical key to their secrets. Uh-oh.
I think use an arrow key. It's trying to click the image.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Thank you. I've written a lot on the Ice Age. I've written about ice cores, the frozen record. The reason I did this is an in-depth book, by the way, on ice cores, is because they claim they can count 110,000 annual layers of ice in Greenland to near the bottom, just like counting the rings in a tree. And things like this, saying, oh, they're millions of years old and all sorts of things. Is that so? Well, there's a lot more to the story, and this book goes into that. Yeah, okay. And my wife and I wanted to teach about the Ice Age and the Bible being true Earth history. So we've written some storybooks, fun storybooks. Life in the Great Ice Age, seen from a 12-year-old boy living in a cave in Southern Europe during the Ice Age, during the melting of the Ice Age, having woolly mammoth hunts, cave bear hunts, and teaching about the Ice Age. It's a teaching tool with a fun story. And we have a sequel to that, focusing just on the woolly mammoths, called Uncovering the Mysterious Woolly Mammoths. And if you want to know more about weather, I wrote a weather book, which includes the Ice Age, and it's been updated recently. It has a different cover, and I have a larger section on climate change, which is a real hot topic in our culture now. And of course, how Noah's flood shaped our Earth, the Ice Age, and what the Ice Age occurred form two end chapters in this book. This starts what the flood was like, what the Earth was like before the flood, in various stages and phases of the flood, and then what happened after the flood. So this is kind of a summary of this talk, the talk last night and this talk. I want to leave you with this, my theme, one of my theme verses. Your faith should not rest on the wisdom of men. That is, with their deep time ideas, millions of years, slow process over millions of years, evolution, but on the power of God. That's where our faith should rest, on the power of God, not the wisdom of men. And here's those websites, various creationist organizations, including mine at the end there, where I have 2 free ebooks you can read. And I recommend creation.com, because on that site, and probably on answersingenesis.org site, there's about 12,000 articles for all ages, children to professors, all scientific abilities, and on all kinds of subjects. There you will find that we do have a lot of answers to a lot of these challenges, not only in the earth sciences, but biology and astronomy and paleontology, anthropology. See, evolution and all this stuff affects practically every field of knowledge. And so that's why we have so many articles. Anyway, I thank you, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. Very interesting talk. So hopefully when people are out maybe on their hikes can be looking out for those striations or scratches in the boulders and
Yeah,
have a new
should see
way
them
to,
around your area.
yeah. So we'll probably have a good chance to view how things look after this event in Earth history, a quite major one. And I'll just take the slide so people can see both of us. I want to say again, those in at the church will be able to ask their questions. If they can give it to Carl at the back or use a mic, let us know so we can get your questions in there. And then also, yeah, it looks like some people already started proposing their questions. See if I can get this right. So in this explanation, I guess, about whole ice age coming from the flood conditions. So all ice sheets will not all melt once the weather temperature is stabilized. So the glacier will not disappear. I guess they're trying to seek clarification around just because once the temperature is steady, I guess now it's 4 degrees or where you put it to 10 degrees. I guess what the
1 degree
glaciers stay.
centigrade. It's been the global warming, at least globally. It's been more in the higher latitudes for feedback mechanisms, maybe 2 degrees centigrade there.
So I guess would they would have melted a lot more in the past than now? Like, is that kind of like a different way for them to retreat before the temperature became stabilized? I guess that they all retreated to their more or less current position before the temperature stabilized. I guess is that
Yes,
accurate?
I think I know what he's asking. Yes, they melted in North America, except for glaciers and mountains, and in Europe, and the Antarctic and Greenland glaciers ice sheets grew a little during there and reached steady state. Yes, they melted, and then the climate generally has been steady state since that time. We're not warming up from the ice age now, if that's what he's thinking. But we have steady state, and we have little temperature changes, like the medieval warm period. Uh, Practically all the glaciers in the world melted back, and that's why the Vikings can settle southwest Greenland during the Little Ice Age from about 1400 to 1880. Practically all the glaciers in the world advanced. In fact, some of them came in Switzerland, where they built the villages too close to the mountains. They came out of the valleys and covered up some of those parts of those villages during the Little Ice Age. And now we're having a general retreat, but not all glaciers are retreating. Just most of them are.
Mm.
So, and this is just due to steady state features of the climate with some global warming from man's adding carbon dioxide and methane to the atmosphere added on. But man's part is very small. Like I said, it's about 0.5 degrees centigrade since 1880. That's it. It's not that big. The way these climate alarmists talk as if the world's going to end soon, and that's not the case at all. It's not at all. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, hopefully that try to get across what the questioner was asking. Here's a question from Facebook. I'm a bit confused about the warm oceans part. The warm oceans came from the flood, right? So I guess if you can explain exactly why the oceans would have gotten warm.
Yes, first of all, they would have been warmer to start with, the pre-flood oceans, because the climate was a lot warmer. We based on what's called paleoflora, that is your buried plants, even at high latitudes, and in Antarctica, they're warm climate plants. And so this and the fact that we had 10 times as many plants on the surface of the earth as we do now, and we know this from the amount of coal, because coal is compressed plant matter, and plants give off water vapor. And so you'd have a huge amount more water vapor, which is about 80 to 90% of the greenhouse effect is by water vapor. Carbon dioxide only has a small effect. And so with a lot more water vapor, the climate would be a lot warmer. Therefore, the ocean water would be warmer. Then during the flood, we had all this volcanism and lots of volcanism. And the fountains of the great deep, water coming from in the crust would have been warm to hot. So at the end of the flood, there's a lot of ways to warm up the pre-flood oceans that were already warmer than today. So we have a lot of heating mechanisms. In fact, I had to bite my tongue just to get it to 30 degrees centigrade. The reason I said the average was 30 degrees centigrade, because I figured that if it was any hotter than that, a lot of the marine animals we see today wouldn't be here.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, as a follow-on, a good question here in terms of clarifying that, because this came across to me too, an interesting one about tell us a little bit more about why you think the flood results in oceans that are 30 degrees Celsius and the increased volcanic activity. So I guess, how did you come to that 30? You kind of answered a bit of that, but is there any heat balance type, any?
No, there's no way to know what it was averaging after the flood, but there's a lot of ways to heat the water. Like I said, we have on the surface, we have these huge volcanic fields like the Columbia River basalts in Washington, Northern Oregon, and adjacent Idaho, but we have some that are 10 times the size in India and Siberia. And even on the bottom of the ocean, we have some thick accumulations of volcanic products. And the volcanic material coming out of the earth would heat that water up. And so, and not only that, if you have water coming from the crust in the fountains of the great deep, that water would start hot. Visit Yellowstone if you want to see some hot water coming up. So those, and also I believe there was a lot of meteorite impacts during the flood, especially early in the flood, and an impact in the ocean would not only blast up water out in the upper atmosphere and even space that come back as your 40 days and 40 nights of rain, it would also heat the ocean. So we have a lot of heating mechanisms, lots. It can easily be well over 30 degrees centigrade, but if it was, we wouldn't find a lot of the marine creatures we have today. So I had to hold it down to 30 degrees centigrade. So that's the way I figured that. That's as far as I can stretch it to 30 degrees centigrade average. So that's how I got that. Did I answer all the questions? There was another part.
Yeah, about I guess maybe explain the increased volcanic activity. I guess why would there have, yeah.
We know that the flood was a gigantic volcanic event because we have a lot of sediment that we know came from volcanoes. A lot of the sedimentary rocks came from volcanoes and were reworked by water and laid down. I saw a figure once, I think 40% of sedimentary rocks probably originated from volcanism. So that's a lot of volcanism. And so, and we have a lot of ash layers in the sedimentary rocks, lots of ash. And ash is by definition came up in the air and spread out and sunk down into the water, was deposited during the flood. So with a lot of volcanism going into the atmosphere, at the end of the flood, we'd have a lot of ash left and also a lot of aerosols. I didn't define an aerosol. An aerosol is a particle one millionth of in diameter, a micron in diameter about. And they float up in the stratosphere from anywhere from 2 to 10 years, depending on how high the aerosols are. And they're the ones that especially cool off the climate. It's a sulfuric acid aerosol, which also indicates we're going to have a lot of acid rain early in the flood, which answers a number of other questions during the Ice Age. This tremendous acid rain, heavy acid rain early in the Ice Age. Mm-hmm. But that's how we conclude that we had a lot of volcanism. It's just from the sedimentary rocks and the volcanoes. We have 700 stratovolcanoes on the Earth, cone-shaped mountains, and so these probably formed mostly after the flood, but probably started late in the flood. And so we have a lot of evidence of volcanism that occurred during the flood and during the Ice Age.
Yeah, I guess, and we don't see that kind of volcanism nowadays, nowhere close.
No, we don't.
Yeah. And then here a question relating it to the Bible. So if you count 500 years after the flood and then another 200 or so after for that to melt, going into Bible chronology, who was alive or what biblical events were going on when the Ice Age was at its maximum and at its melting? And I guess I'd like to tack on kind of what are some Bible references you could kind of point to that show kind of maybe those things.
Well, I would say that the Ice Age was occurring while the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and probably Joseph were around. In fact, it's possible to relate certain things to that. For instance, when Lot looked down at the valley, Dead Sea Valley, Sodom and Gomorrah, he said it was well watered everywhere. Well, during the Ice Age, because of early in the Ice Age, especially in mid-Ice Age, you had tremendous evaporation. So areas that were not glaciated would have heavy rain. And so with heavy rain, a lot of places, it would be a lot wetter in places that were not glaciated. So could be what he's referring to. Yeah. And it's appearing that during the time of Joseph, it wasn't just a regional drought, the 7 years of drought in his time, but I think if you read it closely, I've been told, I'm not an expert in Hebrew, but I've been told that this refers to a global, all over the world type effect. And you would have that. At the end of the Ice Age, things completely changed to melt. You had I'm going to go through this in the next talk. You had a lot cooler temperatures in the north, stronger winds, more sea ice, so less evaporation. So it was a lot drier, windy, and cold winters and warming summers at the end. And this would have ended up with a global drought. And because of that, I think that's why we had 2/3 of these animals disappear on all continents except for Africa. In fact, it's 80% disappeared in South America, about 80 in Australia, 40% Northern Eurasia, 70% North America. Those are broken down, but 2/3. And I think it's because we had a global drought, and that's probably, maybe we can tie that with the time of Joseph.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's I heard geneticist Nathaniel Jeanson talking about that, I think.
Oh yeah, Nathaniel, yeah.
And then how about the book of Job? People say he usually lived around the time of Abraham. There's quite a number of mentions of ice specific. Any thoughts about that? Storehouses of the, and I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it seems, see, they get snow in the mountains of Judea in the winter, and they can have winter effects. I mean, he could be noticing that, but it seems kind of strange. It's mentioned a fair amount of times as if it was more of a big deal. And so maybe he's referring to the Ice Age. Mount Hermon, there's probably an ice cap on Mount Hermon, and colder winters. It's possible, but we can't say for sure because they do have cool winter temperatures there and even snow in the Judean hills of Israel.
Maybe if nobody's got any more questions, maybe I'll wrap up. I think I have one, like talking about how people needed, or the secular geologists believed that the entire earth was covered in ice. How would have any animals have survived? And like, would you have to have evolution start all over again from that time on?
And this was before we had multicellular organisms. It was in the late Precambrian Ice Age, about 900 million to about 600 million, and in the area just before life supposedly, but we had single-celled organisms all through that time, they claim. And then about 540 million years ago, in their scheme, you had the Cambrian explosion where you had this huge amount of organisms, even more phylum than we have today, suddenly there with no ancestors. But so that was after the global ice ages. They had, like I said, 2 or 3 where it was global. And it's kind of funny how they box themselves in a corner on this, because they determined these ice ages by paleomagnetism that said that these ice ages were at equatorial latitudes around the equator, and they're in marine sediments. So that implies a global ice age. But the problem is, you cover the earth in snow and ice, the temperature by the reflectivity of the snow will drop down to 100 degrees centigrade below zero. And to get out of that, it takes an enormous effort, and they're just falling all over themselves to try to not only produce such an ice age, it's called snowball Earth, but to get out of it, because you got to get out of it for life to start evolving. So it's rather comical to read all about this stuff, but they have exotic ways to get out of it, like huge volcanoes went off and increased carbon dioxide. We get carbon dioxide from volcanoes, by the way. Increased carbon dioxide maybe 500 times today, and you had a monstrous greenhouse effect that melted it all. So that's one idea. So it gets crazy.
Okay. Maybe there's a question, maybe not Ice Age related, so maybe we'll save that one for if there's time after the woolly mammoths, because I think we want to give everybody a break before we start the next one at 2:30. But here's a question: how does a day in your shoes look like research-wise? How does a day, research-wise, how does a day look like being in your shoes, research-wise? A day in the life of Mike Oard doing research.
I'm a workaholic, as you might guess. So I read heavy technical journal articles for 2 hours in the morning with my coffee, come up and write for 2 hours, go jogging or lift weights. And then I do lighter stuff, look up references, do email, lots of stuff for a couple hours through the afternoon. And then by 6 p.m., my brain is totally dead. So I watch TV. I like PureFlix. It's got a couple thousand Christian and family movies and TV series, PureFlix. You can get it through Roku for, I think they charge me $11 a month. So that's what I do. That's a typical day. And then in the summer, I go out and look at a lot of geology, but I haven't done it for a year or two because of some health issues. So I'm starting to get back into it. I purchased the second edition of the Roadside Geology of Montana, so I'm planning on really getting out there and looking at rocks more that I've been wanting to do. But I can't do it now. The snow's even flying here, and you won't be able to do any of that here quickly.
And one last question for this session, and we'll try to save any other ones for the next one. So you talked about not needing to worry about another ice age because we were promised not to have another global flood. Well, the promise is for a global flood. Is it at all possible that a large flood, but not global flood, could cause another ice age?
I don't think so, because you got to have the volcanism and a lot of it. And we had a lot of it during the flood, but a little flood, like, or maybe a regional flood like the Lake Missoula flood and other regional floods during the Ice Age they've discovered, they wouldn't be affiliated with volcanism. And also they wouldn't warm the ocean waters up to get the massive evaporation. So no, I don't think it happened, even with a regional flood, which we had at the end of the Ice Age. We had a fair amount of regional floods. I think that it's up to about 40 in various areas, Lake Missoula flood being the most sensational of all.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike. And we look forward to hearing you about our next topic. Sorry if there are any questions that were missed, but hopefully there might be time in our next talk, which is on the woolly mammoth, as it has many mysteries that our scientists have a hard time or just actually don't make sense of. So stay tuned. 2:30 we go back on. I just want to bring to your attention our website here, the local Creation Science Association group. If you go to creationbc.org, you can find many articles and also check out our store. In our store, you can find Michael Oard's books. Just type Oard, just in case there's Mike or Michael Oard, and you'll see a number of the ones that he talked. As he mentioned, there's anywhere from those who are maybe very technical have gone to college in geology, or even for children, a great one to start. Even for adults who don't know much about geology would be this Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibb, with some nice fun comics and interesting topics throughout. So yeah, go check out our website, and we look forward to seeing you back in another 15 minutes.